Hey, good morning, everybody. Let's get started. This is our first faculty corner for 2020, or for this decade. And we have the pleasure of having Pete Vollbrecht over from Western Michigan. I'm going to mix it up a little bit this year, and we did that once last year, in that we're trying to get faculty from outside of Michigan also to kind of participate in our faculty corner events. And we're intentionally bringing alumni who have gone through either a PhD or a postdoctoral training at Michigan and now have a faculty position elsewhere, so that they can share with you how their experience as being a trainee here has helped them in their current position. So we're very fortunate to have Pete, and we'll have Sarah Trumkovich from microbiology, a postdoc, who will interview Pete. And one quick thing, when you fill your feedback survey, if there are faculty that you think in your orbit who will be, a good person that we can host, please put that name down. And if you want to be Sarah for the future events, let Maggie know that too, so we can have you on the list of postdocs and students who want to play the interviewer. So that being said, thank you both of you. It's your show.
Thanks everyone for coming. Maybe you could start by introducing how you got here and where you were before.
Sure. So we can go really far back if you want to, but I grew up just outside Ann Arbor in Dexter. I went to Hope College and got a degree in chemistry at Hope College, which is on the west side of the state. Went down to Vanderbilt and got my PhD in neuroscience at Vanderbilt. After that, came back here and did a postdoc in Carrie Ferrario's lab for about a year and a half, and then a position opened up at Hope College as a visiting faculty member, and I was an alumni from Hope, and I said to Carrie that this is something that I think I really want to do, but I've never really had an opportunity to teach up to this point. I think I'm going to apply for this, and having great mentors is really important, and she was supportive of that, and even said, hey, if you get it, cool, if you love it, that's obviously awesome. If you hate it, you can come back and it won't look weird on your CV, like you're only gone for a year, and we'll keep publishing together and it'll be fine. I loved it. Stayed there for about 3 years as a visiting faculty member. Actually turned down one job offer at a small liberal arts college, which most people in my circle thought I was crazy for. And then ended up staying at Hope as a visiting faculty member for another year and getting this position at Western Michigan School of Medicine after that. So that's kind of how I've gotten here. That's all career stuff. Personal life-wise, got married in there and have had 3 kids in there as well. So I think that's an important part of remembering that life is not just all work all the time. So I think just if you have questions about how to balance those sorts of things, or how I have balanced those sorts of things, I'm happy to answer those too.
Nice. And how long have you been at Western now?
I've been there for, I guess, about a year and a half now as a faculty.
Okay. I guess maybe we'll try and stick to a timeline of focusing on your postdoc experience here.
Yeah.
And then moving on to how you transitioned. And if anyone else has any questions, they can chime in and raise their hand. But for your postdoc experience here, you mentioned you didn't really have teaching experience before the Hope College position. Was there anything else you did while you were here that helped you?
Yeah, so I think honestly, being here, changing mentors made a big difference for me. I don't know how many of you are grad students versus postdocs. I left grad school I freaking finally did this, hooray, and then got to my postdoc and it was people actually think I'm smart, and so that was pretty exciting. And so I think it just gave me a different level of confidence. But while I was here, so I was going to do the teaching certificate program, but then the job that I ended up applying for, I was going to kind of stay in the lab for about a year and see how productive I can be, and then ask for that opportunity a little bit later. So I didn't end up doing that. I did participate while I was here in the ASBMB Hill Day. So I went out to Washington, D.C. and met with Congress people and senators and talked to them about why science was important and things like that. And that was something that, I thought maybe was going to be interesting, but wanted to see, and that was an opportunity to do that. Wasn't for me, but I could see how people would love it. I'm trying to think what else. I also participated in, I'm trying to remember what the actual name of it was, but it was discussions about the future of biomedical sciences and education in biomedical sciences, and they brought people from all over the place. Like, I remember a conversation with the dean of Stanford, who was also at it, and so that was really interesting just to talk about like what should that look like, and what careers should we be getting people ready for and things like that. I'm sure you guys have all had conversations about are there too many PhDs and all of these fun conversations, so that was some of the conversations we were able to have there. In terms of like in Carrie's lab, I think really just she was relatively early when I got here, and so just watching her set up a lab and having that opportunity to be part of building a lab, like how do we order all the things that we need to do microdialysis, let's go figure all that out, and where are we going to set that up, and who do we talk to, just some of the nuts and bolts of setting up new stuff in a lab was really useful for me.
And I guess at Hope College, did you have much time for research, or was it mostly teaching?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So depending on the small liberal arts college that you are shooting for, there's going to be varying degrees of research expectations. Hope has pretty high research expectations, but they don't have that for visiting faculty. So I didn't have startup money or anything like that when I got there, but one of the things that I said, so when I left to go to that, it was originally a 1-year contract thing, and I got the offer from Hope and told them that I wasn't coming unless they made it a 2-year deal, because I wasn't going to move my entire family for something where I was going to have to start looking for jobs before I even started this job. And they said yes to that. And I also told them that I wanted to keep doing research, and that they needed to be able to support me at least minimally to be able to keep doing research, because I knew that doing research was going to be important if I wanted a job at another small liberal arts college or someplace else. And I was able to do that because I was in a position where if I didn't get the job or they said no, I was, just fine. I was on a training grant in Carrie's lab. It was all going very well. So I was able to do that. And I think it's important to ask for what you need and want, and make sure that you're focused on like what you need as how do I get to where I want to go, and not be afraid to ask for it. And so they were kind enough. I mean, we're talking somewhere between $2,000 and $5,000 a year, not a lot of money, but it was enough to do some research, some behavioral research with animals and things like that. Really neat thing about Hope, at least when I was there, no per diem costs for animals. They just take care of them for free. So as long as you can get them, they're basically free. So that was really great, and I didn't have to pay undergrads. They just came and did stuff. So I was able to get some pretty cool stuff out of that. But if you were a tenure track faculty, they would have much higher expectations, but they would also have given me money.
Yeah.
So, and that number looks very different between like an R1 and even within small liberal arts colleges. One of the jobs that I turned down was like, we love your research. And then they offered me 0 startup money, and I was like, well, that's great. No, that's not realistic, and it's not going to happen. So, but someplace like Hope, I think you can reasonably expect somewhere between, $70,000 to $150,000 in startup money, which doesn't sound like a lot, but with some of the support that you get, you're not buying your own disposables, right? So like conical tubes and all these things, like there's like a general shared spot where you can just go grab those and stuff like that. So I think just understanding like what comes with that money and things like that is super important too.
And was that research a continuation of what you had been doing in Carrie's lab? Were you still working with her?
Yeah, so we were definitely collaborating. So she's, like I said, she's been an amazing mentor for me. So she has been really generous with the use of some of the animals that we were using in her lab, and basically donated some animals to me, and I would take them to Hope at a very young age. And so as soon as they were weaned, I would take them, and so she didn't have to pay for them here, and I didn't have to pay for them at Hope, and then we'd let them grow up there. But when I got to Carrie's lab, I had a pretty good idea of what my goals were. So my graduate work was prefrontal cortex mediated, kind of executive functions, and looking at schizophrenia. Her research was obesity. I knew when I left her lab I wanted to do kind of cognitive functions and obesity, and that wasn't what she was doing. She was doing kind of these reward pathways and obesity stuff. So I had conversations with her very early on about, like, this is what we're gonna do, this is what I've done, like, this is where what I want to take with me. And again, awesome mentor. We would do experiments, and we would collect brain regions for the studies that we were doing, and I'd be like, well, what if we grabbed these and I can take those with me when I go? So we would have had prefrontal cortex samples and stuff like this already set up so that I could start stuff relatively quickly when I left. So I think it is really useful to have some sort of a plan. You don't have to have it all figured out. My research, as all research does, goes in different paths and different ways. But it was really useful to have thought about that before I got to her lab and said, like, this is what I want to take from your lab and where I want to go. So, yeah.
Okay. And I guess it sounds like your situation was kind of unique, but how many years of experience as a postdoc would you recommend before you start looking at job descriptions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's a tough one for me to answer, because I think it is unique to every single position. I can speak a little bit to just the fact that I took a visiting faculty position. In hindsight, might not be what I would do again. And I can speak to that a little bit in a few different. So the biggest thing for me, I think, is if you take a visiting faculty position, you have to be really strong and know what you want out of that and where you're going with that. If I took a visiting faculty position...
Can you define visiting faculty? Like, how does it differ? Because I think a number of us can know what the definitions of different faculties are.
Yeah, so there's adjunct faculty and there's visiting faculty. These are technically different. Adjunct faculty, you're like on a course-by-course basis, and you're getting paid for that course. Visiting faculty member, you're going to be a full-time faculty member for a set period of time. Usually it's a year. It used to be once upon a time that those were 3 years, and they basically have all switched to 1-year things, which is really hard on you as that person, because, like I mentioned, you're basically looking for a job before you start that job. So if you're aware, I don't know if everybody's aware, so basically the hiring cycle for academic jobs is going to be like late summer into the fall. That's when you're going to be applying and then starting to go and interview for those positions. So you do that basically 1 year before you would start that job. So I had people who were coming in at the same time as me, and I had asked for 2 years instead of 1. So I was in a better position than them already, because they were, before they started teaching their first class, already submitting applications for the next job that they wanted. That's a really terrible place to be. It's not like you can't do it, it's certainly something that you could do, but it's hard to be mentally in it if you're already applying for the job that's coming next. So those are the differences between adjunct and visiting faculty. Now I don't remember what I was talking about.
I guess when to start looking or how you're ready.
So for me, it was definitely just this job happens to be the job that I really thought I wanted, in the institution that I really thought. I was planning to do a postdoc for about 3 years. So what I was going to say is, I think depending on what your end goal is, visiting, so if I had taken this position at Hope as a visiting faculty member, if I'm honest, I think I was very fortunate to find the position at WMed that I have now, which is very teaching heavy position. If I had been searching for a job at like a U of M, that would not have helped me, right? Taking this position at a small liberal arts college would not have helped me get an academic job here necessarily, unless it was a teaching heavy position, like just in the med school or something like that. But in general, what I've seen from being there and some of the visiting faculty members that we've had, taking a visiting faculty position is great for moving yourself into a teaching-centric position because it shows that you've done some really solid teaching. I think it would also depend on the level of the institution that you're at. Hope has a pretty good reputation, and so it makes it relatively easy to get a position at someplace similar or slightly lower. But I wouldn't take a visiting faculty position at Hope. So this is in hindsight for me, I think, but like taking a visiting faculty position at Hope, I don't think set me up well to try and get a long-term job there. I think that didn't work the way that I had thought it might, and I think that's pretty common in hindsight. So I think if that's like your dream spot, I wouldn't take that job as a visiting faculty member. I would wait until there's a tenure track position available there. And I know that there are other people who have had different experiences. So there are people at Hope who started as visiting faculty members and then ended up getting a tenure track position. So I'm not saying that it's always the way that it's going to be, but yeah.
So I'm very interested about Hope College. I really like how the college works, and I just saw the Open Neuroscience program major this year. So they were hiring a lot of people, and I even thought I maybe should apply for this job, but I thought Hope would really require a very strong teaching experience in order for you to apply.
Yeah.
They didn't say that in the job description, but and then I said, okay, maybe I should get a teaching experience before that. So you think they don't really require a strong teaching experience?
So I mean, this is obviously, I have a very personal knowledge of it, but I would, depending on where you're going, reach out. And it never hurts to reach out to the chair of a search committee and ask them questions. I mean, honestly, I think that's a really smart thing to do if you're actually interested in a job, because it all of a sudden takes your name out of like a pile of names and says, this is somebody who actually contacted me and is interested, which puts you in like probably the top 10, right? Like a number of people who have actually thought to do that. So I think that's a really smart thing to do, but it also gives you a sense of those sorts of things, and those are the things I would ask the chair of that search. At Hope College depends on the department. If it's, depending on the department, they will want a lot more or less teaching experience, and so that each department seems like it has a different emphasis on what they want. So I would definitely reach out to the chair of the search.
When you started at Hope, you hadn't had any teaching experience or very little? I
would say very little to none.
Okay.
I TA'd for a course in grad school. I actually was, because I knew I wanted to be, I knew I was interested in the teaching aspect of things, and I actually set up to TA for a course that I thought would be really fun to TA for, and my PI was like, yeah, no, you're not TAing that course, you're TAing my course. And then I got basically no teaching experience from that and spent most of my time in the lab. I did teach a couple events, courses, or lectures here and there, but didn't do any grading, didn't do any assessment, didn't do, so really very minimal, I would say, not like a GSI here. Gets a little bit more experience, I think. So I had really minimal experience in teaching and definitely had never run my own course or any of that.
When you started, how many courses were you responsible for?
My first semester I was responsible for one course, 2 lecture sections of that course, and then 3 lab sections of that course. Is that true? 1 lecture section the first semester and 3 lab sections for that course.
And was there support from the department since you're relatively new at teaching?
Yeah, I think there was. In that department, it was almost like well, you're smart enough, you'll be able to teach it. So I was fortunate that there was another faculty member who was teaching the other section of that course, and so I was able to go to him with a lot of questions. Like the first time I gave an exam, and like the class average was like a 70.2, and I was freaking out because I was like, people get these grades? Like what? And he was like, this is like a perfect bell curve. How did you do this? This is perfect. And I was like, it is? Really? Okay. But like things like that where I was like, I can't believe like 3 people failed. What did I do? He's like, you didn't do anything. They just didn't do anything. But having somebody there to be able to help me with some of that stuff was really useful. And before the course started, we kind of just went through and said, like, these are all the things that we have to hit. Do it. And he was also a really good mentor in that he was there and kind of set guidelines, but also was just like, this is yours. Like, you do it your way, but make sure you hit these things so that we roughly are covering the same stuff. Yeah.
So first time you taught, how much time did you take for designing per week? Like how much time did you invest?
A lot. A lot. I was teaching human physiology, and I was coming out of, basically straight neuro for the last, 9 years. So I had a lot of things that I had to learn or relearn. And so turns out that there's like things below the neck. Who knew? And so like all the pulmonology stuff, all the cardio stuff, all of that stuff was like, I can joke about it now. I was like a day ahead of my students, like trying to learn all this stuff. And my wife definitely was like, you don't do anything but study all day, every day. And I'm like, yep, because I have to be smarter than they are. So I would say that first year was definitely really challenging. And same coming to WMed. WMed was a little bit different. I co-directed the nervous system course the first year. And now this year I'll be directing it on my own. So that first year I had a little bit of a cushion, which was really nice. They're also teaching at a much higher level than at an undergraduate level. And it's stuff that's more in my wheelhouse, right? It's neuroscience and neurology, which is what I know. Cardiovascular stuff was not my thing necessarily, so.
And when you're coming across the Hope College job announcement and the one at Western, where did you find those?
So what do I use? I used like Higher Ed something, Chronicle. I just had a whole bunch of things out there that were like set up to send me notifications of jobs. When I looked at those also was very restrictive, so this is where like personal life comes in. So part of the challenge for me was like, basically if it's not in the Midwest, I can't apply for it. And in reality, if it's not within like a very small part of Michigan, it was going to be a hard sell. So I've been very fortunate to have been successful with these things. But yeah, so I think that's not your question, but.
How was the interview process at both Hope and Western?
Yeah, very different actually. So I think more common would be the one that was Hope. That was a 2-day process. So within the biology department, you just have to give like a research talk. Within the psychology department, which I think is involved in the neuroscience searches now, I believe that they give a teaching demo and a research talk. And so again, kind of that kind of gives you a hint as to which one thinks what is more important. But a lot of times you'll have a teaching demo and a research talk. I would say the research talk always is going to be there if they have any kind of research component. At a small liberal arts college, and I don't know at some place like U of M necessarily, but I talked to pretty much everybody in the biology department one-on-one at some point. Talked to the president of the college, talked to the provost of the college. I feel like there was one other big person that I talked to, but I don't remember. But like, you're talking to the people who are in charge of the entire college, which is a little bit unique. I'm guessing you don't talk to President Schlissel when you come and interview here, but I could be wrong. Similarly, so then at WMed, that was a one-day process. I did not give a research talk. I gave a teaching demo. They're very much into active learning processes, and so I mean, anywhere you go, you should do your homework. But for me, it was like, okay, I got to make sure that this is like in line with the way that they want their curriculum to run and stuff like that. And then I met in groups with like 4 or 5 faculty at once throughout the day. So a little bit different. Both of them took me around and showed me, real estate things and stuff. You get to meet with a realtor and they'll take you around and show you neighborhoods and stuff like that. Take you out to dinner, breakfast, all the things.
Did you have anyone ask you any taboo questions, such as about like your family or your personal life, and how did you handle those?
I don't think I did in my Western, where I am currently. I don't think any of those sorts of questions came up. Small liberal arts colleges, I don't think any of those questions came up necessarily, but people are just a little bit more open. It's a little bit more of a family style thing, and they really genuinely just want to know. I never felt like it was crossing a line when if they were even asked, and I don't know for sure whether I brought it up first. Like, we certainly talked about my family and my children and things like that on that interview. But I don't think anybody would have been put off if I'd been like, yeah, it's not really what I want to talk about. I don't think that would have been viewed poorly. Having been on other interview processes, at Hope, where other candidates are coming in and being privy to those conversations about those candidates, I don't think not wanting to talk about that sort of stuff would negatively impact the department's view of you. But I think that's a tough one if somebody actually asks that question and you don't want to answer it. I don't know how you go about avoiding that. And I think being a male makes it so much easier. I feel like we don't get those questions as often as females about, kids and, do you want a family? Are you married? Like, all those questions, to me, they don't come off as negative if you say, yes, I have kids, or yes, I want to have kids, and things like that. As a male, I don't think those are viewed the same way as if you're a female candidate. And completely unfair, but I think so I haven't had to struggle with that as much, probably.
And at Western, what percentage of your job is teaching versus research?
Basically, my entire job is teaching, and I love it. So it's a hard money job, which is something that I was after. I didn't want to have to write grants to keep myself fed. And we are required to continue doing scholarship. But that scholarship, so this job didn't come with any startup money either for a lab. I do have a small lab there, and there's internal grant mechanisms that we can kind of use. And when I interviewed, I was like, I kind of want some money, and they were like, apply for this, you'll get it, it's fine. And they weren't lying, so that was good. So I have a small research program there, looking to try and submit an external grant, and we'll see what happens, probably this fall. But oh man, now I've forgotten where we were going again.
Oh, I was asking about percentage of teaching?
Oh yeah, so it's
versus
all
research?
teaching. We are required to do scholarship. Most of the people in my department are doing medical education scholarships. So what are best teaching practices? How can we change curriculum, and what effect is that having on learners? That sort of stuff, which for me, I'm super passionate about how people learn and understand, and what can we do to make that work better. So this was a perfect fit for me.
Nice.
What's the teaching load?
So WMed is a unicorn job. I teach one course a year. My course is 6 weeks long. It's crazy intense for those 6 weeks. I teach, and I direct that course. So I'm not teaching every single event in that course. We call our lectures events because they're supposed to be active. They're not always, but so they are in class or lab basically for 8 hours a day, 4 days a week for 6 weeks. And so it's pretty intense for those 6 weeks. And other people's courses are shorter, so like the behavioral medicine course is 4 weeks, and I'm really jealous. But so we have that for 6 weeks, and then you're required to teach in other people's courses. So like any time, so like the musculoskeletal course, I will teach all their action potentials and membrane potentials and all of their neuro-ish stuff in that course. And then the enteric nervous system, I'll teach that in the GI course. So I'll teach in other people's courses, but I only direct one course a year for 6 weeks. And that is my primary job. And obviously, with that being my primary job, you better do it really, really well, right? But having the amount of time to actually focus on teaching and doing it well, I think if you've had teaching experience, you know that it takes a lot more time than people give you credit for. I feel like WMed does a really good job of giving you credit for the amount of time that teaching well actually takes.
So you said there wasn't a startup to negotiate. Were there other things you negotiated?
For my current position, there was basically nothing to negotiate. So so we get paid, if you want to look up like the AAMC pay scale, that's what we get paid off of, which is very different than say a small liberal arts college. So I got like a 50% bonus by switching schools, which is not a bad thing. And but for me, there wasn't a whole lot of negotiation. They said, this is where the pay scale is, this is what we're going to pay you. I tried, we were living in Holland and Western is in Kalamazoo, and we weren't going to move, at least for a year. And so I tried to negotiate, like, hey, can you guys, throw in an extra $5,000 because I'm going to be driving back and forth? And they were like, yeah, no. And I was like, okay. So I tried, but there was very little negotiation there.
And you mentioned you're applying for, or thinking about applying for external funding. Mm-hmm. Do you get much support from your department in developing that, or your institution? We have
somebody who will kind of help with grant writing. Other members of the department have recently gotten a couple of R15s. So yeah, that support from those faculty members who are doing that. There's only a handful of us who are doing wet bench research, and most people are doing medical education research.
And are you mentoring students as part of your research lab?
Yeah, so I have 4 research students in my lab. I'm still figuring this out because med students have less time than undergrads even. As I mentioned, they're basically in class from like 8 till 5 every day. Well, every day but Thursdays. And so they have very little time. So I'm still figuring out how this works. And there aren't, so WMed is separate from Western Michigan University, so we don't have graduate students, we don't have undergrads, we only have med students, and they have very little time, so we're still trying to figure out how this, I'm still trying to figure out how this works. And I've kind of recently come back to this idea that like maybe this is going to have to be more like a postdoc model where I'm actually doing most of the work and they can kind of come and help out here and there. we'll see how that goes. That's kind of my course is in April, so after my course I'm going to approach this differently and see what happens.
Can you hire people?
If I had money. So that's where the external funding potentially, yeah. So one of my colleagues who just got this R15 has hired a research technician, and I think that'll be really, really helpful for him, just to have some continuity in the lab and have somebody there other than him who can tell students what to do when they do show up. So.
I wanted to ask a different question. When you were at Hope, do you have any, well, maybe not because you, but do you have any like requirements or expectations that you have to like follow every year, like kind of a number of publications or a number of students mentors?
I mean, they definitely expect you as a tenure track faculty member to engage undergrads in research. Like, and again, that's going to depend on what school you're at, but I hope that was definitely an expectation. During my 3 years, I had about 17 students come through my lab. And you know, some of them are more engaged than others, right? But there was definitely an expectation of that. In terms of publications, again, I think it's going to depend on the department and things like that, and it's a really important thing to ask when you're on your interview. Like, what do you want from me? Like, not what does your job ad say, not the, like, what does tenure look like for me? Again, different departments will have different expectations. Even within a school, and most schools are not going to have like you must have 2 publications by this, like it's going to be this wishy-washy thing that ultimately it's like, are you doing your job well, and do we like you, do we want to work with you for the rest of our lives and your life, which is what tenure is, right? Like you're here for the rest of your life, great. So you want to make sure that you like that person, and I think most schools leave that somewhat ambiguous on purpose, so they can mess with some of those things. But I mean, at some place like Hope, if you're getting a publication every year, or probably every 2 years, probably a good number to shoot for, especially early on. You'll notice that once people have tenure, some of those things start to fall off a little bit. But yeah.
So, did that brief you about what are your expectations for the tenure?
Say that again?
For the tenure?
Mm-hmm.
Did they brief you about the expectations? How high?
For my current position? So my current position is actually unique in that there is no tenure at WMed, which, I mean, they hired me in fully expecting me to be there for forever, right? Like that's hopefully any tenure track job, they're also hiring you in thinking that you're going to be there forever unless something goes terribly wrong. But I like it because it means we can go up for promotion whenever we want if we don't get promotion. So someplace like Hope, your first promotion is pretty much tied to tenure. So you get tenure, it also means you basically become an associate professor, which is exciting and cool if it works. If it's not going to happen, then you not only don't get the promotion, but you're probably leaving. Not probably, you are leaving if you don't get tenure. At WMed, I can wait like 15 years if I wanted to, and then be like, hey, I want to be an associate professor now because I want another week of vacation time and more money. And so I could wait 15 years if I wanted to. I don't plan to. I could also say, I think I'm ready next year, which I don't. But so it's not tied to that tenure process, which I really like. So where I'm at now, they've kind of given you an idea of what the expectations are for promotion, but there's no tenure. So.
Okay, out of curiosity, if there's not much research expectations, what are the expectations for promotions then?
So obviously teaching is a huge part of that. Student evaluations and just overall evidence of teaching efficacy. But also there are requirements for scholarships, so we do still have to publish, whether that's medical education, research, or I do a lot of outreach. And so a lot of my scholarship is I'm hoping to build that out of some of the outreach activities that we've been doing. So you definitely still have to publish. It's just not wet bench research.
Did
you apply for any other job when you were applying for the WMN position?
Yes, yeah, I did that cycle. I did. So I'm trying to think. The first year at Hope, I didn't apply for anything. I knew I had a second year, and if I didn't like the first year, then I would have just come back here. The second and third years that I was at Hope, I did apply for jobs. The second year is the year that I got an offer that I turned down, and everybody in my life was like, "You're nuts," including Carrie. Carrie thought I was making a poor decision. But then my third year, applied. I think I interviewed at 4 places, including WMed. I didn't get offers from the others. And it's, obviously getting to the interview is great. Like not a lot of people get to the interview. Usually 3 people get selected to go and interview, sometimes 4. But it's still awful when you get the interview and you think it went well. There were a couple where I was like, this is just not going to work for me. So not getting that offer in some ways made it easier. There was one in particular where I was like, if I get this offer, I'm probably going to take it because like I need a job. And I don't want to be a visiting faculty member for forever. And how many years is an okay number of years to be a visiting faculty member before people start wondering if you're like broken? So I was probably going to take it, but I didn't get it, and that was good for me. The WMed job actually came on the cycle late. So I actually had gone on 3 interviews already and hadn't gotten offers from any of those jobs. And then applied for this WMed job. And this was an interesting one because I originally wasn't going to apply to it because it didn't look like it was a tenure track job. And I was like, I don't need another visiting position somewhere or an adjunct position or what, like. And then I was chatting with somebody and they were like, no, that's like a tenure job. And I was like, it's not. And they're like, well, there's no tenures. That's why it doesn't say anything about tenure in there. I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up applying for that and getting it. But yeah. There's a lot of downs, there's a lot of fails, right? I think that's an important thing too, right? I applied, the first year, I think I applied to 15 jobs or something, and I think I got 2 or 3 interviews, which is not terrible, honestly. And then the next year I restricted my search a bit more as it became clear that people in my life were not going to move to Colorado. And so I think I applied to probably 6 and got, 7 if you count WMed, so I think I got 4 out of 7 interviews, which was really good, but then didn't get them, so yeah.
What was the nature and track of the job that you turned down that everyone was like, what are you doing?
It was a small liberal arts college position, and it would have been a good job for me, I think, in the long run. Looking back on it, it would have been a heavily teaching position, which I've definitely found that I enjoy. This was the same job that also was like, we love your research, but then wasn't going to offer me money to do that, and I wasn't really sure how those 2 things would work together.
What would you say was your most difficult interview question?
Ooh, that's a good question.
At either location or at both?
Yeah. I don't know. I didn't feel like, honestly, any of them really, like, if you go and look up, like, all the interview questions that people can ask and all the, like, just being prepared, I didn't feel like anything just totally threw me for a loop. But I think that I've learned that not everybody always goes to these things prepared in the same way that I do. So just reading up on the questions that might be asked of you. So one phone interview, I totally botched one, and I didn't get an interview, and I knew I wasn't going to as soon as I answered this question, because that question was, why do you want to teach here? Why did you apply for this position? And I was like, well, because like I'm good at it, and like I've been teaching, and I'm good at teaching, and like I do neuroscience, and for whatever reason, like it was the first phone interview that I had in that cycle, and I was like, I hung up and I was like, yep, that was poor. Having some canned answers to some pretty obvious questions is not a bad thing, especially if I get nervous. So like knowing that I like to teach and I like having an impact on students' lives, these would have been good things to say, other than like, well, I'm pretty good at teaching neuroscience already, so like I think I'd be good at your place too. That was basically the extent of my answer to that question. It was the rest of the interview. I was like, oh, this was well, I can keep talking, I guess. So yeah.
And then the opposite. What do you think was the most important question that you should have asked or that you did ask?
So I think it's important. It depends on what's important to you, right? To some extent, for me. Really understanding what you're getting yourself into, I think really important, but I think everybody should know this, but like, is asking what the expectations really are of you in that position. Not what does the job ad say, but like, what do you want me to do? What does success for this person look like? And that's a good way of putting it, right? Like, what is the successful person who takes this position? Where are they going to be in 5 years? Like, what do you see them doing? I think that's a really important one. And whatever you can ask to get a sense of the culture of that place. And for me, and maybe this is why I didn't get as many offers, but like when I went to these places, I took it as like, they already think that I'm good enough for this position. Now I want to decide whether they're good enough for me. And that sounds really full of yourself, but like, you want to make sure that someplace you're going is where you want to be. And I think when you're in that postdoc, like, for me visiting faculty, like, you're like, oh, I just need something. And that's not true. Don't do that to yourself, because you don't want to be miserable in a position that you take. So asking whatever questions you need to ask to find out whether you would like it there, not just whether they would like you.
What are the different expectations for summers in some of these positions?
That's a very interesting question. So my current position is very interesting in that it has a very corporate feel. It's probably the most corporate feeling place I've ever been in academia, ever. I have 5 weeks of vacation time, which is pretty great when you talk to other people in the corporate world. Like 5 weeks of vacation is pretty awesome. When I say that I'm going to be on vacation, they actually mean it. So like, I'm going to take 2 weeks of vacation means I'm not answering your emails, I'm not doing anything related to work, I'm gone. Sorry, see ya. Which is very unique to academia. In a small liberal arts college, while I was there for 3 years as a visiting faculty member, I tried to treat it like I was there as a tenure track person, because that's what I wanted ultimately, was a tenure track position either at Hope or someplace else. And the expectation is that you are doing research over the summer. You will be doing research. This goes back to negotiations and discussions. Make sure you get paid for the summer. You can do that when you're first starting out. Eventually you're going to have to work for free over the summers. Most small liberal arts colleges are going to give you a 9-month salary, but they're going to expect you to work for 12 months. That's just the reality. I don't know anybody that's not doing that in a small liberal arts college setting, in the sciences anyway. So make sure you can do whatever you can to get paid for the first few summers, so that you don't have to worry about that. I know people who are, this is a whole nother issue, but like when you're paying for childcare, but you're also going to work and not getting paid for it, you're actually paying to go to work, right? Which is kind of ridiculous, and it's a whole other thing. So if you can at least get paid for a few of those summers, that would be awesome, and that'd be something worth negotiating or talking to people about. Because at least at Hope, there were mechanisms where you could get paid. When I worked there over the summers, I got paid less than my students did for the summer. And I told my students that, and I said, look, like, I'm not going to be here all the time. You guys are doing the work. These are I'll be here and telling you what you need to do for the day or for the week or whatever, but I'm not going to be here from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. I'm going to go to the beach. because I live right next to it and I'm not getting paid. So, but yeah, so I think that's a really, expectations for summer are something worth talking to people about, and again, getting a sense of the culture. I don't know if liberal arts colleges that are more teaching bent and less research bent might have a little bit different experience, but in general, where I've been, you're going to do research and you can hope you get paid something.
Is that where you could use like external funding?
Absolutely,
to pay
yes,
yourself?
yes. So if you have external funding, you can have that pay for those 3 months. Yeah, and that makes your salary much nicer too.
I have a question about the recognition letter for the current job you're applying. Did you still get a letter from your PhD mentor?
Yeah, so I have a unique situation because of my path. So I was at Hope as a student, and then I came back to Hope as a faculty member. So my letter writers were Carrie, my PhD mentor, and then my undergraduate mentor, who then became my department chair. So those were my 3 letter writers, basically my entire career have been those 3 people. So.
You didn't get a letter from University of Michigan?
No, that's Carrie. Yes, I did. Yeah. She was probably the most important letter. I don't know because I haven't read them. But
what key piece of advice would you give to a new assistant professor during their first year?
It won't be this bad forever. I think just setting goals and realistic goals, and for me, organization is super important. So recognizing that there's going to be certain parts of the year where you're not going to get as much done. Exam time and things like that are not going to be times where you're going to be in the lab all the time. The summer is when you're going to be able to do the most stuff. A piece of advice that was given to me, it's not even advice necessarily, but something to remember, and I think it's very true, is imagine what you can get done in a year as a postdoc, and assume that it's going to take 5. I don't think that's unrealistic. So hopefully you can do a little bit more than that, but especially at a small liberal arts college where you're working with undergrads and things like that, like set your expectations differently. Obviously, if you're someplace like U of M, then those expectations have to be very different, just based on what you're supposed to be accomplishing and things like that, and you're going to be getting time off to just do research for the first year or 2 and then start to incorporate teaching into that a little bit and things like that. But at a small liberal arts college, that would be my best advice. And then, yeah, just keep swimming. You'll get there. So if you have a heavy teaching load, it's going to be crazy the first year, but you'll get through it.
Do you have any tips on what to do before you get there, like how you have a little bit more time before you join, so how you can use that time?
Like before you show up?
Yeah, before you actually show up, is there something you have to do before?
I think just having a real good plan, again, of what you want to do when you hit the ground. So, knowing what things you want, if you're setting up a lab, what things do you need right away, and what things might you be able to get a little bit later. If the department is willing, even though you're not there yet, like, can we order things that are going to take a longer time to get there? Can we order those ahead of time before I get there so that they're there when I show up? Things like that. Obviously, if you know what courses you're teaching, you can start to prep those courses and create syllabi and things like that. But I think that would probably, what can I get done that will make me the most productive when I hit the ground running? And I think lab-wise, that's like what I think people are usually blown away with, how long some things take to get there. I actually need this, that, and this other thing, and so I've got 2 weeks now that I'm not doing anything because I don't have this one thing. So I think that would be something worth considering.
Have you been able to find mentors at each of your faculty positions? And how did you find them?
Yeah, I felt really good about it. So I think graduate school was probably the hardest for me. in terms of finding mentors, and I don't want to make it sound like my mentor was, my PI was terrible. He's been really helpful and supportive, but he was just in a very different place than I was. I had an older mentor to start off with and well established in the field. And I think when I went to a postdoc, I was looking for somebody who was younger, who was going to want to be publishing more. So my grad school mentor, I published one paper and that was it. And I felt like we could have done more, but he was not as pushed in that direction. Then with Carrie, she was brand new and was like, let's get stuff out. And I was like, this is amazing. And she really understood my goals. So I think one thing that was really important for me when I started my postdoc with her was having conversations with her very early on about like what were my expectations, what did I want out of this, where did I want to go. A conversation I had with her really early on was just about like my schedule. I was like, look, I have a child and I have a wife and she works nights and I don't, and so I leave at 5 on the dot when she's got to go to work because I have to pick up my kid before she leaves for work. And like she was super supportive and understanding of that. And I think just being open with your mentors and your PIs is really important so that everybody understands everybody else. And I think a lot of times as postdocs or as grad students, kind of hard to have that conversation, but I encourage you to do it because I think they don't know what you're going through unless you talk to them, and vice versa. So, but then yeah, I think at Hope, like I said, the other person directing the human physiology course was a great mentor for me as well. And then now in my new position, the individual who helped me co-direct the nervous system course last year is now moving into the department chair position there. But he's been a really strong mentor for me as well. So yeah, I'm fortunate, I think.
Thanks for your time today. Thanks for all the advice.
Great. Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.